Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. A leak of a major Supreme Court decision may see the court overturn abortion rights as we know it. A leaked majority opinion obtained tonight by Politico says justices have voted to strike down Roe versus Wade. Justices can still change their minds on decisions, and the court's holding won't be final until it's officially published. This is the first draft decision in the court's modern history to be disclosed publicly while a case was still pending, which experts say could lead to an erosion of trust among justices. I want to bring in legal analyst Doug Burns here on the show. Doug, thanks so much for being with us. As I said, This is historic here, and I really think the key point, like I mentioned at the end, this is going to have an effect in the future on the trust within justices.
I couldn't agree with you more. We're all kind of stunned, honestly. I just found out about this a couple hours ago. I'm shocked. It's disgraceful. It's shocking. You have an employee, most likely a law clerk, in the building, the Marble Palace that we all respect. You know, I'm a member of the Supreme Court bar. I've been in the building many times. I watched my late father argue a case there, by the way. But I'll tell you what, to leak an opinion just strikes at the heart, the core, the integrity of the institution of the Supreme Court of the United States. And it's really disgraceful beyond. I can't overemphasize that.
How does something like this happen?
Well, that's a great question, obviously. The way this happened, you know, I'm old school, and I always say, you know, things are like a recipe for soup, you know. You take chicken, you take vegetables. So how did this happen? What's the recipe? The recipe is that this issue has boiled over to a toxic level that's just unbelievable. Just look at the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing, and that tells you everything you need to know about the precursor to what happened tonight. There's just a meltdown of epic proportions. Everybody turn, oh, we have to pack the court. We need new justices. All over this one issue, okay? This issue legally, real quick diversion, is not all that complicated, okay? Legal scholars across the board know that there's a misinterpretation, okay? Which is that what I'm about to say, people are gonna say, I can't believe he's against abortion. Did I say I'm against abortion? Of course not. Abortion is not in the Constitution, runs the core argument, and it should be left to the states to legislate state by state. It's not a federal issue, and therefore Roe v. Wade is made out of whole cloth. Justice Ginsburg suggested that. Professor Lawrence Tribe of the Harvard Law School suggested that. I'm not playing the game, by the way, about, you know, this liberal or that liberal said it. That's not my point. I'm just saying that there's a good deal of agreement in legal scholarship and theory that the case is just a reach, and it's a matter that should be in the states, okay? So how we got here, though, to your question finally, which I'm not dodging, is that we've gotten to a level in Washington that we've never seen in our lifetime, okay? And the toxicity levels have gotten so high that you have angry, distraught people leaking a first draft of an opinion suggesting the possibility, notice the words I'm using, of overturning Roe versus Wade and by extension the Casey case. And this thing happens tonight, and I'm just stunned. And I'm very, very curious to see what, if anything, the court is going to say, either tonight, unlikely, I would imagine, I'm glancing over at the clock, or tomorrow morning. And they've got to come out with an immediate statement saying that this type of action undermines the essence, the core, the integrity of this institution, which has been a bedrock in our country since its founding. This will not be tolerated. This person is going to be fired and disbarred, and so on and so forth. But the answer to your question, just to repeat it, is unbelievable toxicity and anger levels coupled with people willing to throw away their career A to Z over this one issue.
Yeah, we are actually taking a look at aerials, or not aerials, but live pictures outside of the Supreme Court itself, as people have shown up in crowds, some on their knees praying, many people holding up signs. Doug, what does this mean? Many experts saying that the court needs to issue its opinion tonight.
Well, that's interesting. That really is. I don't think, I don't have a perfect crystal ball. I don't think that's going to happen. But it's certainly a very viable thing to say. Again, a little broken record point. And again, I really am stunned. I mean, I'm like a fighter who's been, punched really hard and I'm reeling. I just cannot believe, I know it sounds maybe overly dramatic, but I cannot believe this happened. I'm disgusted times 10 about this. And obviously I'm going to be studying it and looking at the opinion, the 98-page opinion authored by Justice Alito. But I think, it's interesting. I heard a little bit of the sort of political commentary before I came on with you. And a lot of the people were saying, that this certainly looks like an attempt, to back the court off, intimidate the court. They then pointed out, and I agree with them, that it's very likely that it would have the reverse effect. But again, it's very, very, very troubling. I think that the opinion will most likely, be issued toward the end of the term. But again, it's hard to say. I honestly can't believe. I think it was Professor Charlie who just said that he never thought, he'd really see this day, in the sense that, the really overtly political institutions are one realm, but the court was always, a very dignified,
right,
confidential atmosphere, and that was breached tonight badly. Yeah. And it's really troubling.
I mean, the person who leaked this, what potentially could they face?
Well, that's another interesting thing as we literally are digesting this, in the last hour or whatever it's been. One expert, who was actually a state attorney general, said that she wasn't aware of what particular federal statute, criminal statute, might be involved. And so I'll jump in and say that I'm not sure either. But to answer your question, A, immediate termination from the court, obviously. B, if they're a lawyer, which I would assume they are, but even that you don't know. I mean, it could be secretarial support staff. Having practiced law for 36 years, I know that documents are in the hands of other lawyers that work with me, paralegals who work with me, secretarial staff who work with me, and so on. So we don't really know that. But trust me, if it's a law clerk, they're going to be disbarred and they'll never practice law ever again. And then criminally, that's something that I have to think about and look at more tomorrow. I'm not sure off the top of my head that it's a crime per se, but at the same time, when Speaker Pelosi, there's an interesting aside, sorry for the digression, but when she ripped up President Trump's State of the Union address, there was a statute that made that a criminal offense, technically. Nobody charged her with it. So here, the leaking of a confidential Supreme Court document could very well be a criminal offense. I'm just not sure.
Well, there's a lot of people who may be watching right now who are extremely interested in the story, of course, but likely will not be watching or reading the opinion itself. For those who are not going to read it, what types of things will we find in those almost 100 pages?
No, I'm glad you asked me that. Thank you. Basically, what you're going to find in there, and I read the first 2-3 pages, is Justice Alito. First of all, let me say this, because I think you'll find it interesting and so will the viewers. I mean, basically, the way Supreme Court opinions are assigned is that if the Chief Justice is in the majority, he assigns it. And if the Chief Justice isn't in the majority, then the senior most justice assigns it, okay? That doesn't really tell us much of anything because the Chief Justice may very well be in the majority and he assigned it to Justice Alito. But moving on from there, you're going to see Justice Alito painstakingly laying out what I touched on a minute ago, and that is that, nowhere in the Constitution, in the sacred document that we've abided by for all these, hundreds of years, there's no mention of abortion in there. And as such, it's not really a constitutional issue from the document itself. And then he's going to go into an analysis of why that telegraphs that the matter should be handled by each individual state's legislature. He's going to go through why he feels, and then the others who join in with him, that Roe v. Wade was, as a matter of technical, legal scholarship and interpretation, was incorrectly decided. He's going to touch on what you've heard everybody talk about, which is stare decisis, or precedent. It's comical, by the way, to see the one-liners, on segments where everybody's like, you can't overrule a precedent. You can't overrule a super precedent, a term that they just made up. I've never really heard that term. But the point is, and then the comeback from the other side is, well, wait a minute, under that logic, Dred Scott, which held that African Americans weren't citizens of the United States, shouldn't have been overruled. Plessy v. Ferguson, which said that separate accommodations were okay as long as they were equal. That shouldn't have been reversed. So the point is, of course, a case can be reversed if the viability of it is in serious doubt, as this has been since 1973. So again, the opinion, 98 pages, it's the culmination, of a long-standing scholarship about how Roe is wrong and Casey was wrong, and therefore. But let me end this little explanation with a big misunderstanding that a lot of people have, and I don't think your viewers do, but I'll just repeat, and that is that, they're saying you can't have abortion. That's not it at all. Back to my earlier formulation, they're saying that if you want abortion, totally fine, totally understandable. You do it in the state legislatures in each state. It was the identical argument. It was the identical argument, by the way, in the same-sex marriage case. Justice Scalia, the late Justice Scalia, brilliantly wrote that there's nothing wrong with having same-sex marriage. It's fine. Many, many states have implemented it. They should continue that process. But we don't want 9 unelected lawyers doing it as a super legislature. That's what this is. So I understand people's emotions. People aren't trained in law. Oh my God, I can't believe they're saying that we want to take away this right from women. That's not what anybody's saying who is a legitimate legal scholar or a legal expert. What we're saying is, as a matter of law, it's not a federal constitutional issue and should be handled by the states. That's all that anybody is saying.
Right. And Doug, let's not forget the history behind all of this. This isn't coming out of nowhere necessarily. The leaked report, of course, is, but the overturning of Roe v. Wade, a lot of analysts say that was going to happen. That was inevitable.
Well, there's no question. I mean, while I often like to say, oh, I'm a purist and I do law more than politics, but the reality is, of course, with President Trump having the opportunity to appoint 3 conservative justices to the court, obviously there were legitimate discussions about whether or not, Roe would come under attack. But tonight, again, is just beyond disgraceful to leak out a preliminary first draft opinion from the Supreme Court. It's just, you just can't believe it, honestly.
So I want to just
but to your question, hold on. I'm sorry. Of course, this was an ongoing discussion of the makeup and the framework of the court. So I think what you were insinuating, and I agree with you, is, don't sit there and pretend that everybody is so shocked about it.
Right.
This was something that was being discussed as the ideological makeup of the court was adjusted by President Trump, who won an election. You remember President Obama famously saying elections have consequences and all of that. So he got to pick Supreme Court justices. You can put aside the Merrick Garland, dust up in that discussion for a second. And this is where we are with a conservative majority. I did not think necessarily that Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned, by the way, real quick, not to smash my own crystal ball. But I was saying that they had more than enough room to uphold the Mississippi timetable, the 15 weeks, under the theory that Casey set up more of a viability discussion based on how many weeks, as opposed to a rigid trimester system that was in Roe versus Wade. And therefore they could say, with changing science, changing medicine, changing technology, we uphold this, but we're expressly not overruling Roe versus Wade. That's what I had predicted. I still may be right, by the way, because tonight I'm not so sure, but tonight could be a little bit of a head fake and a red herring. It's hard to say.
Yep. Well, once again, I just want to point out for all of our viewers who may be tuning in here, these are live looks outside of the Supreme Court as people have been showing up almost by the minute here. A lot of people with signs, many chanting. Barriers have now been put up around the Supreme Court after this bombshell report from Politico. And we still want to continue to highlight that this does not mean that Roe versus Wade has been officially overturned. This is just an opinion report that was leaked to Politico. We are getting quite a bit of reaction, not only outside of the steps of Supreme Court, but also from lawmakers, including Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, who we knew would definitely be outspoken about this. She says, "I am horrified by the apparent draft Supreme Court opinion leaked this evening that would overturn the right to abortion guaranteed by Roe v. Wade. For the sake of women across the country, this should not be the Supreme Court's final opinion when it comes to abortion rights." It goes on to say, "We have been fighting this battle for too long. I refuse to go backwards. I refuse to let my new granddaughter have to fight for the rights generations have fought for and won, rights that she should be guaranteed." Ending saying, "For anyone who needs access to care, our state will welcome you with open arms. New York will always be a place where abortion rights are protected and where abortion is safe and accessible. Just as the Statue of Liberty lifts her lamp tall in our harbor, New York will never stop fighting for what's right, unafraid and undeterred." This is just one of the statements now coming out from lawmakers here. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more reaction about this, but she brings up an interesting point, Doug, that this doesn't have to be the final decision. And you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the person who leaked this, or people who leaked this, could have ulterior motives, right?
Well, there's no question about it. And again, I'm repeating what I heard from others, you know. Full disclosure, I thought their points were spot on, and they were saying that this has become so toxic, as I was saying, that somebody would be willing to just ruin their entire career because of this particular issue. Mm-hmm. Now, Governor Hochul, wow, let me unpack that for a second, because that's interesting. I'm horrified that there was a leak. So when I heard that formulation, and remember, a lawyer's toolbox is words. So when I heard that, I'm like, oh, okay, she's horrified at this breach of security. No. The continuing comments were, I'm horrified because this undermines the rights, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm not telling the governor how to do her job, but, you know, it's two completely separate discussions. One discussion is this never should be leaked. This is a full-on frontal assault and attack on the highest court in the United States of America. This cannot be tolerated. This cannot stand. This should never happen again. That's one discussion. The other discussion is the merits of Roe versus Wade, the merits of the Casey decision, and so on. And so here, again, in all the emotionalism and the toxicity of the issue, the governor just breathlessly says, I'm horrified about this because now my granddaughter, et cetera, et cetera. So I found that very, very interesting. And again, you can't expect people, of course, and I'm not trying to sound, you know, pompous or anything, but you can't expect people to understand, you know, legal theories when so much emotion's involved. But the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, real quick, and I left that out earlier, says that that which is not enumerated in the Constitution itself, in the document, is reserved to the states. And that's the core legal argument. But nobody can see that among the anger, the toxicity, the emotion.
I guess more of my question, because they tried to get a comment from the Supreme Court spokeswoman, Patricia McCabe, and they say no comment at this time. Could this potentially reverse their decision?
It could. You know, my thinking, literally 5 minutes into being aware of this, I read a couple of really fast articles online. I said to my wife, you'll find this interesting. I said, wow, this particular paper, I won't name it, they're very, very smart with words, because they go, this would overrule, Roe v. Wade. They didn't say it was overruled.
Mm-hmm.
They said if this opinion were final, it would. And that's the best way to look at it. So, but 5 minutes in, I said, well, wait a minute. This is the first draft of an opinion, okay? I've read many, many, many books about the Supreme Court. So I know that basically the way it works is they circulate a first draft and a process gets underway trying to get people on board with that first draft, seeing who's on board with it. And what typically happens is there are various suggested changes. To put it in real simple English that everyone will understand, a justice will say, I am amenable to possibly joining this opinion if you change this section of it or that section. So the point I'm trying to make, without getting too much in the weeds, is that when a first draft is circulated, that's pretty preliminarily in the game, although I would note that the document was marked February of 2022. So I found that extremely interesting. It didn't say April of 2022. So again, we're all trying to, keep our counsel here and try to digest what's going on. But it's not clear to me who has or hasn't agreed to this. You can bet your bottom dollar, obviously, that, justices such as the retiring Justice Breyer, mm-hmm. Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, they're not joining an opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. But that may be a silly way for me to put it, because if they have 5 votes, that's all you're going to need. But to your question is such a good question because it's unanswerable, at least tonight. And that is, could this change the opinion? That's the $1 million question. I don't really have the answer for that.
Yeah, quite the experience for Justice Breyer ahead of retirement, right?
Well, there's a very interesting issue there. I mean, it's not any big earth-shattering thing, but the new justice has been confirmed, right. And he's still on the court, which to me is a little confusing, sort of as a legal purist. I mean, what do we have, 10 justices? Now, I'm being sarcastic because she hasn't taken the oath as the newest Supreme Court justice yet, but I found it interesting that, we have 9 on the court, 1 who's been fully confirmed mm-hmm. by the United States Senate. So, it's remarkable. Again, it's going to be very interesting to see as I hit the ground running literally tomorrow morning, a couple things. What, if anything, is the Supreme Court going to say? And you just touched on it, very well. They're not making any statement tonight. That seems logical because this is such an overwhelming, earth-shattering thing that they better really try to get their ducks. I mean, one cable host who was a former Supreme Court clerk, and she said that Chief Justice Rehnquist sat everybody down the first day. And he said flat out, if you leak any document, that's it. You'll never practice law again.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I guess that would be my next question, too. I mean, what type of protection do opinions like this typically have? I mean, who even sees this? Who would have the ability to leak it to the press?
No, I mean, it's absolutely, sacrosanct. We have many analogous situations. For example, when you go in a grand jury, which is secret proceedings by definition, because you don't want to tarnish people's reputation who are under investigation but may be cleared. You don't want people walking down the street. Did you hear that Dave Smith is being investigated by a grand jury? So there, you're talking about court reporters, government legal personnel, the grand jurors themselves, obviously. So to answer your question, you have obviously the 9 justices. One commentator tonight, and I was drinking in a lot quick, was saying, oh, wouldn't it be incredible if maybe one of the justices were involved? I'm not going there because I don't believe that in a million years. But again, everybody's just expressing opinions as we're all shell-shocked. But on your question, the law clerks, and there are 4 for each justice, so that's a pool of 36 people. Secretarial and support staff, word processing staff, things along those lines. So, it's not that big a universe of people, to go right back to your question.
Right.
Probably, for sure, less than 100 people.
Hmm.
And I think that the Chief Justice, one of two things: A, internal investigation, call every single law clerk in, or B, somehow involve law enforcement, FBI. It's hard to say, but they're going to find out who did this for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would imagine there's going to be quite a bit of an investigation, lots of questioning for whoever put their hands on this and allowed
they
it
will
out.
also, get phone records, cell phone data, texting data, email data, all of that, because it's very, very unlikely, that this happened without those type of communications and interactions with other people.
Yeah. And Politico running with it and reporting it as well. I mean, this is just, it's hard to say because it's so unprecedented in the history of the Supreme Court. Has anything like this happened?
No, unfortunately, and again, as I said, I'm very distraught about this. As a lawyer, for as long as I've been, extremely, extremely troubling. And so the point is, Politico, I saw somebody point out that, they certainly wouldn't have run with this, unless it seemed pretty substantial to them, and, and that they would check their sources and stuff. And I agree with that. I looked quickly, obviously, at the opinion, and, you're not going to see, I'll be a little sarcastic, too many counterfeit 98-page Supreme Court opinions, to volleying back to the people saying, is this real? It's definitely appears to be an absolutely real document. And when I read it tomorrow, the 98 pages, like reading a short book, the point is, I'll see that for sure it's real. It's the real document. But to the core point, the core observation, it's just horrifying that somebody would do this. It really is.
Well, Doug, I just have to kind of alert everyone to what's on the screen right now, because we are live, raw and unfiltered. And with this story, there are two very separate feelings. This is abortion rights that we're talking about. There are people who are pro-life, and there are people who are in favor of abortions. And this is going to be hostile. And we've got a lot of people showing up here as barriers have been put up at the Supreme Court. Clearly, court not in session, as we're coming up on the 8 o'clock hour here in Phoenix, 11 o'clock out on the East Coast. But these protesters likely not going to go away, as they all just showed up within the hour here after this leak was reported. Doug, anything that you're going to be watching going into the rest of the evening here and tomorrow? As you said, you're going to be reading the entire opinion itself, and I'm sure we'll be able to get a nice recap from you after you do that. But what things should we be paying attention to and looking for?
Well, I think tonight, I think the big thing, and you hit it, is whether or not any statement is going to come from the court. It's hard to say, but again, with something this monumental, I mean, I heard one person say the Chief Justice undoubtedly right now is conferencing, canvassing, discussing. This is a serious matter. So the first thing I'm looking for is a statement from the court, and I'm just loosely predicting that you're not going to see that. Then obviously, as I said, I'm going to read the opinion carefully so I understand exactly where Justice Alito is coming from. How much emphasis does he put on the fact that Roe and Casey were wrongly decided? How much emphasis does he put on this 10th Amendment point I mentioned, that if it's not enumerated in the Constitution, then it's left to the states, things like that. It is a lengthy opinion, 98 pages. So we'll see that. And then, of course, I'm going to be watching pretty religiously from both sides, ideologically, seriously, in media. What I've already noticed just tonight, obviously, is that, if you break it down into political lines, the right, not surprisingly, is discussing more how horrible the leak is and so on and so forth. The left just breathlessly goes into, oh my God, this is undermining everybody's rights. They don't even mention the fact about the leak.
It was leaked.
I find that, also very troubling, obviously. Again, I'm a legal commentator, so I don't necessarily always, get in the weeds of the politics, but all throughout the Trump era and crises, anytime something was leaked that the left liked, they never even mentioned that it was leaked. Okay, but when it was in reverse on the other side, of course, they would melt down that it was leaked. So it's troubling and toxic. But I'm going to be looking for any statement from the court tomorrow morning, big time. I'll be reading and studying the opinion, of course, and then I'm going to try to figure out. This is key. I'm going to try to figure out with some Supreme Court experts, a little more of what I've read in the books I was telling you I've read, which is, well, wait a minute, when a first draft of an opinion, and I have one lawyer in mind who will remain nameless, who clerked on the Supreme Court for Chief Justice Rehnquist. And I'm going to call him and I'm going to say, get a real breakdown from him on, he may say, Doug, you got to understand, when the first draft is circulated, all it really means is A, B, and C. So I need to get my arms around that much more specifically. I never worked in the building. I worked more in the district courts and so on. So those are the sort of three areas that I'm going to be looking at.
Well, I just want to play one hypothetical game with you really quickly here, because you never know what can happen, and we have seen that time and time again. Should the Supreme Court issue an official opinion tonight, which you said is not likely, but should they decide to do that, how quickly could things move?
That's a great question, but I don't think they can. Okay. And I'm glad we had a fuller discussion just in the last few minutes into this business. No, hear me out. Business about the first opinion. So the point is, if you take what I'm saying at face value, which is, although maybe I'm wrong because it was in February. So, if let me put it this way, if they're farther along in the process and they have the various votes, then they could ostensibly do it. But at the same time, the dissenting opinion may not be written, okay, may not be prepared, and they just may not be ready to go. But you're right. If they were ready to go, maybe there's an argument that they should issue it tonight. I don't disagree with that, but I think as a practical matter, it's probably unlikely that they're not ready. I mean, this thing obviously, remember, hit like a ton of bricks tonight. Everybody was caught just absolutely shell-shocked. So it's unlikely that the case is, officially ready to be released as an opinion is the point I'm trying to make.
All right, well, a live look from the Supreme Court right there as one light is on, but it is busy tonight as they head into 11 o'clock there on the East Coast. Legal analyst Doug Burns joining us here on Zoom. We just so appreciate you breaking it down for us because this is history, really, in the making. Didn't think that we would be hearing this, especially in this capacity, even though we said it was quite likely that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. But I don't think any of us would have guessed that it would be in this way.
No, I mean, again, you have to be, a purist, okay? Let the process run its course confidentially behind closed doors. The justices meet in conference, okay? They circulate these preliminary draft opinions. They discuss it back and forth. Changes are sought. Votes, anybody can tell you, votes are often, traded and so forth. Okay, let's get this justice on board. I'm not suggesting that it's overtly political. It's legal. But the point is, I agree with the way you formulated the 10th Amendment, Justice Alito, but I disagree on a point you made with the Casey case, and I'd like you to consider adjusting it. This is what happens. And again, not to be corny, but the very fabric of the institution depends on confidentiality, the ability of what I'm discussing to take place candidly, confidentially, et cetera. And now in this toxic world that we've emerged into, we get hit in the face like a Mack truck tonight. Boom, a 98-page, completely confidential, preliminary first draft opinion is now available on the internet. It's just, I'm shaking my head for good reason, obviously.
Well, we will be continuing to get analysis here on Live Now from Fox, but we want to thank you, Doug Burns. Thanks for being with us. We so appreciate it, and I'm sure in the coming days we'll be able to get some more information from you, more details as this develops.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you.